Hey everyone, it's your girl Pluto, and today I wanted to just share with you my beautiful co-host on the Pluto Aquarius platform, Michelle Thompson, aka Aquarius, who has just published her brand new book and released it called Being Your Own Hero, a Spiritual Journey. Michelle is an advanced hypnotherapist, transformational life coach, NLP master practitioner, Reiki master, and a certified cognitive behavioral therapist. And she's also one of my very close friends who I've been honored to work with on providing spiritual support to the greater overall community. And of all the people I've met in my life, Michelle has really, she's truly a butterfly. Before Michelle wrote this book, she and I had a number of conversations about this particular aspect of her life, where she went through the bulk of her own personal inner transformation and the meaningful events that led up to it. And I just thought it was so beautiful. It was always such an inspiring story. And I was so pleased to find out that she had decided to put this down in a form that could really be shared with people as an example of how, no matter what our background is, no matter how broken we feel, we have the capacity to transform and come through that. And then not only do that, but then even, leverage those experiences, transforming our pain into strength to share with others and to inspire others. So, I asked her if we could do a special podcast on it because her book is amazing. Her story is amazing. And I really wanted to get that out there just to share with all of you. So, Michelle, thanks for doing this with me.
Thank you for doing it for me. I really appreciate this.
Oh, well, it really truly is my honor. You're so fantastic. And your story is just so compelling. And I was wondering, before we begin, maybe you could just give us a little background on the book. One thing that I just recall was, this really interesting kind of beginning to the journey that started with you meeting a special spiritual mentor in your life, which I thought was really amazing. And, just the details of that story were amazing. And I was wondering if you might be able to share that before we started getting into maybe, just some of the general themes of the book, just to kind of like build a platform for kind of this mystical journey that just came into your life out of the blue and just inspired this new start, this new beginning for you that led you from a previous era in your life where you were involved in a lot of toxic programming in your mind, that you lived that in yourself and in your relationships. I recall from when I got to read your manuscript that you start the book out, the first lines talking about how you had been broken. And I think a lot of people have felt that way in their life. I know I have. And now you're just in such a vastly different space. But it really began with this one meeting, a very fortuitous meeting. And I'd love for you to kind of share that with the audience if you would honor us so.
Yeah. So you're right. I experienced what you would call like clinical chronic depression. In the book, I'm talking about like there was never any space of not being depressed. It was what level of depression am I in? And it was a really challenging, time in my life because I actually believed this is how everybody was. And it just seemed very difficult. So I didn't trust people who were happy because I thought they were fake. And if they smiled a lot, I said something's up, they're hiding something, and they're the most dangerous type. I would stay away from them. And what that did for me was that it kept me around toxic people because you know what I'm saying? It's like I didn't feel safe around somebody else that was healthier because they didn't have issues, supposedly. And to me, that felt very scary. So I was always being hurt and traumatized and abused and victimized over and over again by people that were that way over and over again. And I didn't know what love felt like because I had never experienced it.
Actually, we talk a lot about synergy, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I just thought it was so interesting that you brought that up specifically because I was literally thinking about that this morning when I was getting ready for work. How when we're children, maybe we've been picked on or whatnot, and then uh, I just thought of this phenomena of how it's natural then for people to 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 try to like claim that trauma by starting
Mhm.
to hang out with other people who are also traumatized, right? And it becomes like the rebellious crowd.
Mhm.
And it's supposed to make you feel safe, right? Like
Mhm.
you do a
Mhm.
lot of trauma bonding. But one thing that I didn't recognize until later in my life, and what I was thinking about this morning was um, when you end up in social groups like that, rather than providing healing to each other, right, and support, people sit around and they talk shit on each other, they
Mhm.
rib each other all the time. If somebody starts doing something well in life, like they get a good job or they're doing well in school, there's a pressure, to maybe get that person to hold themselves back. They're somehow like violating the trust of the group by ascending to a level, that's no longer part of the social norm. And so just like what you said, the you can never then be comfortable with people who are living a happier life because when you're trying to escape the hurt and the pain that others were causing you, you put yourself in a position where you just reinforce that. But it was in this idea of like, well, we're all in it together and
Mhm.
nobody understands us. So, but still people are inherently not treating each other well. And it just creates that structure in your mind that
Mhm.
everything else is abnormal because you tell each other
Mhm.
that like, we're fucked up, but we're cool. Everyone else is really fucked up, right?
Mhm. Well, for me, it was like, I I was constantly, being rejected, even with female friends, especially with female friends. It was the worst, actually. And, this constant rejection. I would get really close to somebody, and then they would ghost me. And it would be so close that I felt like almost like our souls were entwined, and then poof, they would disappear. And I never understood why. I mean, I do now, but back then I never understood, and it was so hurtful. There was so much pain. I always felt like my heart was always breaking because I was constantly losing people. So for me, when I got a divorce and I started dating, all the things that were happening to me from my girlfriends started happening to me from men. And I was getting, so I started getting it from all different angles. Um, People would act very interested in me as a person, and then they would disappear. There was a lot of like victimization happening, a lot of victimizing, and it just kept on reinforcing my trauma. In the midst of this, I got very spiritual. I started coming into my gifts. I started actually seeing spirits, hearing spirits. A lot of clairvoyance started happening, and there was a lot of shifts that were happening at this time. And so I really believed that I could talk to them and I could hear them. And so when I felt like I wasn't getting messages, I would always go outside and I would stare at the stars. And I lived on the lake, and I would go out there, and there was this nice little tree with a split trunk, and I would sit right there on it and just stare at the lake and stare at the stars. And I would pray and talk to God that way because I felt for whatever reason, I was closer to God that way by looking at the stars. So I would sit there and I would just cry my eyes out. Please bring me love. Please, somebody love me. I was just this desperate soul. And one day I heard this voice that said, go meditate. So I was like, woohoo, finally God's going to talk to me. I'm going to hear his voice. And I'm going to, I'm going to get some answers. He's going to tell me that this wonderful man's going to come in and be my hero. And so, which is why I call it Be Your Own Hero, because I was desperately looking for a hero, somebody to save me. And so I ran upstairs, got into my bed, and tried to meditate. And it was late at night. People were coming home from the bars. I lived in an apartment, and I could hear alarms going off and people talking as they're walking back in. And I was thinking, this is never going to happen. I'm never going to be able to hear God's voice because all this noise is just, so I started hearing something in the bathroom, and it sounded like water, like somebody turned the faucet on. So I thought, did my son get up and use the restroom? I'm sitting up. I sit up in my bed thinking I'm going to see my son. And, coming out of the bathroom, I'm going to see this man instead. And he walks towards me and he says, I have a message for you. You need to write a book about love. And I just kind of sat up a little bit more and looked at him and I said, who are you? And he said, you can see me? And I said, yes. And he goes, and you're not scared? And I said, no. And he came over, he sat on my bed and he was like, why? And I said, well, see all these crystals everywhere? I got this place on lockdown. He thought that was a little humorous. And so he was just like, okay. And so I basically told him he had the wrong person because I wasn't that person for him. And he said, yes, you are. And he said that, and I went to make all the excuses about why I couldn't write a book. I'm not good at writing. I couldn't find an editor. I tried this before. I need this, I need that. I can't afford this, blah, blah, blah. And I was giving every excuse that I possibly could. And he ends up saying, just write the book and everything will be given to you. And everything that you need will show up. Just write the book. So I go to write the book. And I decided, well, if God wants me to do this, I'm going to do it. So only thing I could think of is self-love. And I wasn't doing a very good job at that. And I spent probably a good week sitting there on my computer typing. And one day it literally, and this is what's so freaky, is it flashed on, flashed off, did a system reboot on its own without me touching it and wiped out everything. And at that point I said, okay, you're trying to tell me something. I slammed the computer and, stomped outside, stood in the stars and started like screaming at God. And I was like stomping my foot and saying, I need some help. If you want me to do this, I'll do it, but I need some help. And I said, and I don't want somebody saying in due time, and I don't want to hear the little whispers, and I don't want to, all this kind of stuff. I want a real live person to show up and help me and tell me what, somebody that's connected to you. Put an angel or a saint in a body, somebody that is connected to you, that I can get a real message, not a fake, psychic or whatever. And I said, and I'm not writing a word until you do that. So I stopped my foot and I, said,
Said,
like,
I surrender, Lord, but I need these stipulations.
here's my stipulations. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's something really funny about that because when he actually showed up and something he said that was hilarious. But so I it was about 6 months later, I just went on with my life. And there was a few things I did. I actually believed he was going to show up. Like there was no doubt in my mind God was going to send me that person, so I'm just waiting. So I mean, I did all kinds of stuff. Like I did a green cleanse and like I did this whole thing. Like I'm going to get myself, like I'm going to fast and I'm going to do a green cleanse and I'm going to meditate every day and I'm going to get myself like purified for this angelic force that's going to show up in my life to have God speak through him. And one day my sister told me she wanted to go to a crystal store. As we're driving, suddenly I felt like a voice told me go to a different store. So I said, we need to turn around because I think somebody's telling us to go somewhere else. And she's like, okay. So we ended up going to this other store, and that was a store where I met the monk. And I walked in.
Monk, you said?
The monk. Yeah. The monk. Yeah. I walked in thinking I was going to talk to this other guy. He's a healer that worked there. and he wasn't there, but I was introduced to Patrick, who was a monk, but he was a Taoist monk, not a Buddhist monk. And he was wearing this black linen, like gown type ritual outfit, right? And it's hooded, but he wasn't wearing the hood. It was, back like this. And he had all these prayer beads, and his hair was shaved, and he's really tall and very, very, very good looking. And he approaches me and he like does this. He bows to me. I mean, I'm thinking, what the heck? Why are you bowing to me? I was just like, I didn't know what to do with this. So I started telling him that my sister, I was wanting to take her to this other healer. And he said, oh, yeah, I know him very well. I'm just like him. Come in, let's talk. And he starts like basically knew everything about Jenny, her husband, her son, her daughter. And I was like, well, you're good. Hold on. So I grab her, bring her in the room. And at that point, he literally like knew everything about her life. I mean, it was so bizarre. He was actually reading a letter she wrote from his mind. The letter was at home, and he was literally reading it and reading it, like, and I was just like, my sister was like, grabbed me, like this, and she's like, he's reading the letter, the letter. And I was like, what? He could read your mind. He could do all kinds of weird stuff. And as we left, he went to hug me, and when he did, he sent this surge of energy into me that went all the way from my feet, all the way up to my head, and then back into my heart. My heart started beating really fast, and tears just poured out of my eyes. I mean, it was just like, and I was like, I kind of sat back and I was like, why did you just do this to me? And he said, because you need to know it's real. And then he ended up sending me a text message and told me, show up on Friday. And if you don't do that, then you need to come by yourself. So I thought I was going to talk about my sister. That was when he basically took me in at that point. And the next 3 years of my life was this whole transformative space of astral projecting, going into all different places, like all kinds of weird stuff. This man could do things that was beyond comprehension. Like it's like something you would see in a movie, and it was real, and it was happening, and I was a witness to it, and I saw it, and I experienced it. And and he wouldn't take no for an answer. He was like, do as I say or I'm leaving. And one of the things he said to me was, when he told me that he was the person I prayed for, without me even telling him about that, he said, he goes, if you would have asked a little nicer, you would have gotten someone a little nicer, but instead you got me.
Yeah,
So,
you gotta be careful what you ask
yeah,
for.
you be careful what you ask for.
Real. That is real.
Some real shit. So he was kind of a hard nose, putting his foot down. Like he was like, one time he didn't talk to me for like 2 weeks, and I was freaking out. And he was basically trying to push a lesson upon me that I needed to learn. And it was like, I wasn't going to call you until you got it. And it was the first person that I ever actually felt love from. I mean, and I felt like he was the only person that loved me. So there was this really entwined connection. During that time frame, people would ask me if I was sleeping with him, because nobody could understand that kind of love. They thought that because he was a man and he was a woman and I loved him so much, that there was more to it, but there wasn't. He was my I mean, I went through this whole thing of wondering what he was or who he was, or still to this day not sure. But at one point I thought, it's like, if Jesus decides to take you on as a student, what would you say? I mean, I felt honored that he took me on. And sometimes I thought he was Jesus. I know he wasn't, but that's not the point. At some points, I thought he was, and thought he was all kinds of things. I thought he was an angel, and I thought all kinds of. And my imagination was constantly like trying to guess who he was. He's been called the Monkey King. He's been called Metatron. He's been called a lot of things, but he was definitely transformative in my life. And the rest of the book goes through this process of how I changed the way I thought, and and how, I mean, he kind of forced me into a corner. I didn't really have a whole lot of choices in this. It's like, I'm
Actually,
gonna
you
give you.
did.
Yeah, well, I felt like it.
Made your choice up front.
It was like dangle a little carrot on the string and, follow me while I'm carrying this little, carrot. And it was like, I literally would have lived in a monastery at that time, because he was, I would have given up everything, if he would have let me. I mean, there was a point where I asked him if I could. I mean, I was just like, I'll give up everything and I'll follow you. I'll wear my little black outfit and walk around praying and bowing to everybody. Whatever. I'll be, and he just thought I was the craziest person when I said that. It was like, "What are you talking about?" And he tried to sell it like it was this terrible thing, and I felt like then I started feeling rejection, and I was like, "Okay, he's rejecting me." But the reality is he was trying to get me in a space where I was on track with my purpose. And me kinda going over here and thinking I'm gonna go live in an underground monastery and meditate and pray all day wasn't my path. And every time I would get off path, he'd show up. Even after the 3 years were over, he would randomly show up, and that's not in my book, by the way, but he would just randomly show up. There was one time I started practicing magic with some friends, and it was chaos magic, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I didn't have a mentor, and he shows up and blows the whole thing up and basically destroys it. Like, this is not the direction. Stop. And he was just like, he would always like interfere in the middle of something and push me over here, and just randomly show up and like, what are you doing? Stop this. There were times where I would even hear his voice. Like after our time frame is over, I'd hear him scream at me, like, stop this. you know, it was it was a very interesting journey. But ultimately what it did was it taught me how to get over my shit, basically, and um come to a this full transformation that happened. And it was this, and literally it felt like I would do a transformation and I think I was all good, and I'd do another transformation and think I was all good, and then I'd do another one, and it was just like I just kept on elevating that consciousness. um and this led me to understand that it's never over.
Yeah.
It's always going. There's always this progression of growth, that when you think that this is it, and there's there's always more, you know. I But basically that's kind of a good summary of what actually happened. I don't know if you have any questions about that, but
Well, no, I don't have any questions, but there were a there were a number of things in your story that I found notable.
mhm,
Um, Primarily how the story of your introduction to your spiritual mentor exhibits or exemplifies what I consider to be a fundamental universal spiritual formula for
mhm,
transformation. Um, first you're in a very dark space, right?
mhm,
You're in the darkness, you can't see the light. And then you begin to start having little kind of, you know, indications there's something more, right? And so you start driving yourself to explore what that is, but there's part of you that's holding yourself
Mhm.
back, right?
Mhm.
And so you're kind of groping around in darkness. And then finally you get frustrated, right? The human mind, the human ego gets frustrated. But in that frustration, there's a breakthrough that occurs, right? Which was shown in your surrender situation. Now you surrendered. You said, okay, God, you know what? If this is what you want me to do, I'll do it. But then, your lower nature came in and said, but I need to have it this way, this way, this way, this way, right?
Yeah.
This is common, right, for humans.
Yeah, it's definitely, ego
And
driven.
yeah, and as the saying goes, asking ye shall receive, right? I have been humbled a number of times in my life where I have, consciously or subconsciously made stipulations, or made a claim about something, and it sure did manifest, not in the way I thought it would, but it taught me a lesson. Now, this guy clearly was a blessing.
Mhm.
But in meeting him, you know what I hear in your story is he saw, essentially, what's the theme of your book, right? The theme of
Mhm.
your book is becoming your own hero.
Mhm.
You were always trying to find someone else to be your hero, whether it
Mhm.
was a man or someone else, projecting a savior mentality on other people, and then when they would fail you, it would recreate that trauma experience for you, and then you'd
Mhm.
go looking for another savior, right? This is very common in toxic relationships of all kinds, right? We just keep the same power, like a little hamster on the wheel.
Mhm.
But he clearly wanted you to become your own hero. So he kept putting you through experiences that would
Mhm.
that would break you free from trying to project that on him. Right? You
Mhm.
wanted to be in a monastery, you wanted to give it all up for him.
Mhm.
He was
Mhm.
the first person that you really met in life that gave you unconditional love. And so that lower part of yourself wanted to say, okay, finally, I have what it is I've been looking for. I'll just give it all up. Just tell me
Mhm.
what to do. Tell me how to do it. Let me just check out and you go ahead. But he knew that was not what you needed. But he also
Mhm.
knew that's not what you asked for. You
Mhm.
invoked him into your life. When you surrendered to God, you said, I will do this. You
Mhm.
made a pact, right,
Mhm.
with the Lord. And even though that pact came with, stipulations that your lower nature,
Yeah, and I want this, and this. Yeah.
that's right. You made an oath, right?
Mhm.
An oath and said, I will do it. And you were true about that oath. And so his responsibility as your mentor was to help you stick to
Mhm.
that oath. And, that manifested in a variety of different ways, even him coming through with the hammer from time to time to break up your foolishness, right? But
Mhm.
in the end, what happened? You became your own hero. You became
Mhm.
independent. You broke yourself free from the patterns of needing to be dependent on others, and then transformed yourself into a woman that now spends her days, her time and energy in service to others, helping them to come through that. And I feel like that's just so on theme with your book, and it's so beautiful how that story, it's almost like a seed form of the overall story. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out because
Mhm.
that pattern was exhibited very early on and then expanded upon over time in your own personal journey as you continued now, once you became independent, to become even more free. And you notice that in each cycle, right? As you elevated and finished up one cycle, you entered into another cycle,
Mhm.
where you elevated again. And, I recall us having a conversation about this one time where I think you said something to the effect of, you know, every time you level up, when it's time to level up again, you have to recognize that new level that you achieve now becomes the old level. It's now
Mhm.
obsolete, right? And you can't attach yourself to that thinking that, okay, cool, I made it this far, now I've achieved this. No, now you have to look at that level, which was new and better, as now the old. And you gotta,
Mhm.
you gotta
Yeah, it becomes your greatest victory becomes your baseline, because now that's the low part. And, because you're having to I always think of it like a video game. You enter into the next level and it gets a little harder, and you go to the next level and it gets a little harder. It's not, and if you were to start all over, it's like so easy. But when you first started the game, it wasn't easy.
Yeah,
You
but
know?
at the end of every level that's more challenging,
Mhm.
what do you get? You get more stuff, right? You get more,
Mhm. You do.
you get more food,
Yeah.
you get better armor, it's like,
Yeah.
and I've actually always found video games very compelling, and superhero movies as well, because they're a symbolic representation of what we want as humans
Mhm.
and of what we know happens when we go through a big challenge. Then in the end we get the rewards, but what do? We got to
Mhm.
use those rewards for the next level.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that kind of happened through this whole process of this journey I went on was, there was a lot that I learned in this process about the spirit world. And that kind of put me on the path of searching for more, because I was raised Christian. So, like, think of all of this happening to you. You're like hardcore Christian. You've been traumatized with love. you know
Let's define hardcore Christian, because that can be different for
I Oh,
people.
okay, okay.
From a very, very
Fundamental, very strict, very, not allowed to wear shorts, not allowed to mix swim. It was very, very fundamental, like, very. And I was starting to I was breaking through from that already, because I gotten away from that church and moved on, but I didn't know anything else except for religion. And I was in the process of learning and seeking and trying to understand, and I'd gotten into, like, crystals and stuff like that, and meditation, but I didn't know a whole lot, and I still had that core belief, that Christian belief. So for me, um, all of this was, it was new. It was okay. I could accept that God sent me a messenger, and he showed up in my room. I could accept that. But what I couldn't accept, that I was having such a hard time with, was all the other stuff that came with the monk. It was all the weird stuff, remote viewing, astro projecting, all the gods and the goddesses and the transcendental, whatever it was, travelers and all kinds of beings that showed up. It was, I met a fairy, I met a goddess, I met, well, actually a couple of goddesses. Um there was, one particular character. He only showed up once. His name was Ion, and he called himself a transdimensional traveler, and he basically said, "You're gonna need to, where you're going," and he goes, "You're gonna need to take some classes, you need some money, so I'm gonna help you manifest." And I never heard from him again, but suddenly money started coming in. And it was, but there was just a lot of weird things that were happening in that time frame that it was kinda hard to handle. And it was good, that he was kinda there, but he would just randomly say the weirdest things. Like, he sounded like he was an alien and he couldn't speak English. 'Cause there was one time where I said something, because I hadn't heard from him in a while, and um because he had done some traveling and he came back, and I was like, "I missed you so much." And he goes, "I don't understand this concept of missing that humans have. Can you explain that to me?" What
Interesting.
what is this? And then he wouldn't call himself a human. I'd say, "Well, you're human too." And he'd get real mad at me and, ruffle up and say, "I'm not human. Why would I call myself a human when humans have been here warring after another? Why would I want to put myself in this category?" And he would get really upset over. I'm like, "Dude, you have a human body." that doesn't make me human. Yeah. It was a trip. Yeah, but there was all this stuff that happened, and it was literally like my world was shaken up. It was like you take somebody who has a very fundamentalist idea and concept of things, and then I all of a sudden I'm thrown into having some gifts that I didn't know how to deal with. And then suddenly this messenger shows up, and then I get this monk that's supposed to be, the answer to my prayers. You know, it was just like this whirlwind of crazy stuff that starts bringing me. He brought me Gabriel. He brought me the goddess Isis, the goddess Athena, the goddess Aphrodite, um, a fairy named Star. There's that one particular character, Ion. There was quite a few that showed up, and sometimes they showed up because of something that they had to offer that Patrick couldn't do. So it was, yeah, he was like, "Here's a friend," you know, and he was, one of the things that was really kind of interesting was when I would go to meditate, he would send me a text message and say, "Start meditating, clear your mind, and when your mind gets clear, I'll be there." And suddenly I would get into the state of nothingness, and then I'd feel this tap on my shoulder, literally, physically. I remember one time reaching over and touching his arm, and I could feel it. And and then next thing you know, he's literally like almost like pulling me, and we go into these different realms of places. And some of which I didn't even know where they were. I mean, I think I told you this one time that one of the places that I ended up um, visiting, I ended up discovering it was Venus. And so I was like, wow, this is a place that I've gone all many times and I didn't even know. There was there was a lot of transformative stuff in this book. It's not just a self-help book. This is a book about miracles and transformation. And I I do believe that if me being in the state that I was in, that I could change, then anybody can change. Because I don't know how I could ever repay this man. He never charged me a cent. And every so often, even after our time was up, I'd just send him a message and just tell him how much I loved him and how grateful I was for him. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm gonna start crying. And I would just like, "There's no way I could ever repay you." And I said to him, I go, "The only thing I can think of is just keep paying it back to everybody else." And, and he said, "Now you get it." And, he
No,
said, "That's," he goes, "That's all we can do," and he's like, he kinda, like, affirmed that I finally understood, and, I'm sorry I'm crying. It's just a very, like, remembering some
no,
of this.
it's beautiful.
Yeah, like,
There's
what.
nothing wrong with crying, people. Let's be honest here, okay? It's a beautiful part of our process and of our experience in the human realm and in the spiritual realm.
Yeah, if somebody completely is responsible for your life and changing you like that at that level, it's kinda hard to, not feel, uh, so much gratitude, for that.
Amen.
So, yeah.
It when you were just speaking on those last points there, it really made me think of that song Amazing Grace and why
Yeah.
it's such a powerful song, right? Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. It I feel like for the human condition, humans are more prone to the pain, trauma experience. It's so much easier for us to bond with others, by talking about our pain. It's so much easier to reinforce concepts of pain in our life than for us to focus on things like gratitude and love. When we talk about concepts like manifesting, and how one of the most powerful places to manifest is to be in a state of gratitude, and also to be in a state of love. It's so interesting how many humans, it's like a deer in headlights. What does it mean? What does it mean to love? Right? Why is it that we as humans have such a difficult time understanding what real love is and what healthy love is? And so we do when we come into these go through our spiritual path, and we come into these higher states of awareness, right, in our connection with the divine, we do look back at our past, and we say, wow, I was definitely saved from myself, right? We feel like we were wretches, but we recognize that we would never know the state that we're in a higher state if we had never known that state, right? And that once you enter into those states, that closeness with the divinity, we also recognize that there's no commerce. There's nothing we can pay back. There's nothing that we can ask for, or anything. All of that's inconsequential. Because what have you ever had in your life, ever, that has moved you the same way? There's no car, there's no purse, there's
nothing. Yeah, the only time I've ever been moved like this has been through spiritual experiences, and that's, I think that you said something that's really important, and I think this probably even be a good way to kind of close it off. But you said amazing grace has saved a wretch like me, and being brought up in a very, like I said, very fundamental Christian, the belief structure around salvation is almost like buy your ticket and you're home free. And from my personal experience, salvation is transformation, or even transmutation. I was a wretch and I was saved. It wasn't, oh, here's my ticket. I'm going to believe in God. I'm going to believe in Jesus. Okay, now I got my ticket to heaven, so I'm saved. And that's not that. You're not being saved from hell. You're being saved from the internal hell that you've been living, that you're elevated from pain into enlightenment. And that's the salvation, is being free from all that pain.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful point. And something else I'd like to just point out to the audience here is, your story encompasses, your beginning in a very fundamentalist Christian church, in which your experience, so I just want to be clear on that. I'm not putting anyone's religion down, but your experience as an individual, Michelle, was of a very restrictive lifestyle, where you felt you were made to feel guilty about many things, and lived through this whole kind of paradigm of rejection, that you can never be good enough, and constantly feeling guilty. And then in your surrender to God, you were introduced to a monk of a Taoist tradition, totally separate from Christianity.
Way separate. I didn't even know what to think about it.
Separate. Yeah. And yet now today, you're hosting podcasts with, Frater Mercurio on our platform, called The Walk with Christ, right? You were, through that experience, you were able to have a reconciliation with what, in my perspective, for you, is, the real Christ. And, I can say the same thing happened for me. I grew up in, both a Catholic and Protestant church. And I just didn't understand what was going on when I was a little girl? Why would you say a little baby is born into sin? There were just things I couldn't wrap my head around, and I went searching for other things. And in that search for other things, I was able to finally come back to my own personal relationship with Christ.
Mhm.
And, I'm certainly not proselytizing. I very much believe that everybody, has been given free choice by the divine. And there's value in all the traditions out there. But
Mhm.
what I'm trying to point out here is that things don't have to be mutually exclusive,
Right.
right? You
Right.
can walk other paths and find your reconciliation in the one that you came from, if that's right for you. So it doesn't have to be scary, this idea, you're not abandoning or being disloyal or anything, in my opinion. It was only really through studying some of these other
Mhm.
traditions that I was able to formulate a real relationship with Christ,
Mhm.
which is very deep for me today. So I
Yeah.
just really appreciate, that element about your story. It's, it's like a full circle, right? You had a
Mhm.
full circle transformation, even being able to reconcile with, indoctrinated a belief system. And now here you are teaching and helping others as, hypnotherapist, a transformational life coach, NLP master, Reiki master, cognitive behavioral therapist. I mean, you're doing it all and still going through your own transformation still,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Continuing
Mhm.
to level up and just highlighting one of the things you said in the beginning, which is, the process never ends, and
Mhm.
there's beauty in that. So, is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with today? Any final thoughts, you know, for our audience?
Um, I love what you said, coming full circle, because I feel like that's exactly what happened. It's just an expanded, um, it's more like that deeper connection with everything instead of me being separate from God. And I talk about this like in that very first in the prologue. It's like we see ourselves in a cave trying to get out of the cave, and God's outside the cave. That's that light out there. And our goal is to get out of the cave and eventually get there. Like life is the cave, we're the cave. And we see it separately. And but that's not the case. The goal here is to allow that energy, that to God to live within you and to expand your life that way. And God is never separate from you. It's you that's separate from God. So when you allow that to happen, you end up realizing it's always there. And all you have to do is just make that connection, because prayer is real. It works even no matter what. Yes, yes, yes. And I mean, I know when my son was in the hospital, he was rushed to the emergency room, and they thought he was going to have the surgery that was going to, like, life threatening surgery. I mean, I called out to every single adept. I called out to all my healer friends. I called out to everybody, and I said, okay, start doing rituals, start doing prayers, start calling out, do this. And I had so many people doing it. And then, of course, my mom, the prayer warrior, I started getting all these people in, and it was like, let's go home now. It was like nothing. It's like, how does that happen? How do you go and do a CT scan on somebody and say that all your internal organs are blocked and you're going to have surgery? And then suddenly, no, you're good. Go home.
Just a few hours later.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, that power of prayer is so important. It's like, if you believe, and when, what is it? Two or more I gather together, I always say it's a sure deal. So if you ever have an issue, you get your prayer warrior friends with you, and transformation happens. Yeah.
Amen. I'd love to do a show with you on the power of prayer. I
Oh
think that would
yeah.
be wonderful. Yeah, and thank you for speaking on your book today. And just sharing up with us a little bit more background about your relationship with, the mentor that was essentially the answer to your prayers and the miracles associated with that. Just really highlighting the beauty in the power of the divine to answer our prayers and to guide us closer to him, so that we can have that real relationship.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
I certainly hope everybody here picks up this wonderful book. It's a fantastic read. It, Michelle gave us some details that weren't in the book today, so you got some extras. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff in the book that we didn't talk about today. And, of course, I love Michelle, and maybe I'm biased, but I don't think so. One thing I can say about Michelle is her ability to go through personal transformation and just pull out the specifics of, the elements of transformation and to relay those to her students and to relay those to people who, may not have been able to specifically cognize what those steps are or the phases are or what the experience may be like. This book definitely does a wonderful job of demonstrating those really key points, the landmarks that happen during, what I would consider a grand transformational process. And so I personally, can just say it would be a highly beneficial book for anyone to read, and I hope you truly enjoy it. Again, thanks, Michelle. Uh, Everyone, I hope you have a beautiful day. We love you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. And we'll see you later.
Bye.